end of last year, we decided that rather than doing perhaps a little bit more navel gazing, because in the past we'd produced quite a lot of extensive research by communications people for the benefit of communications, that actually we'd ask CEOs really for their opinion on what they felt was required by a CCO to be effective in the future, and what they needed and what they were going to demand from future CCOs in the future. So it was a challenge to get the ear or the time of CEOs was no mean feat, I have to say, but when we did get the time, and as I say, 40 CEOs took part from organisations such as KPMG, Accor Group, the Global CEO of Accor, ING, many organisations from large international organisations, but also smaller trade associations. Actually, once I got them talking, I couldn't stop. You know, they were very passionate. On the whole, they were incredibly passionate about this profession, about what they felt the role was and what they felt it was going to do for them in the future. The report is pretty challenging. People can read it for themselves, it's available, but essentially CEOs are calling for CCOs to reinvent themselves. You know, now the question is how. But I think in terms of their interpretation is that coming from a role where perhaps they were quite tactical in terms of content production, you know, executive translation services, you know, translating business decisions and strategy into you know, a articulate and storytelling way for the purposes of channels and audiences, now to being a much more strategic business role, which really is going to lead and drive change and engagement within the organisation and within external stakeholders. So it feels like a big shift in terms of what they're wanting, and we believe this is down to several things. Obviously globalisation, digitalisation, audiences online everywhere, the crises of reputation that have been played out in the media has, quite frankly, you know, put the willies up CEOs in terms of, you know, defending organisations' reputation. So they recognise that actually what they need is real true leadership from CCOs in the future. On the whole, and this is where they need to have courage, right? CCOs need to tell CEOs what they don't want to hear sometimes. You know, if they're not coming over as authentic, if they're not, you know, engaging with their stakeholders in the way that the organisation needs them to, they have to be able to tell the CEO the truth, the reality of that. And that's a big challenge for people. That's a big step to take. It's not advisory, it's much more challenging in terms of the approach, but that's what CEOs want, that's what they've asked for from this study. I think it's good news for the CCO, quite frankly, that actually you know, the CEO now is required, if you like, to be true to his values, to be more authentic, perhaps to consider the purpose of the organisation beyond generating shareholder value, because actually it allows the CEO to come out in terms of their true human being, who they are, what are they passionate about. Obviously, if that CEO perhaps is from the old vanguard and is still there just to make money and make the bottom line, then that is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And I think communications directors on the whole, in my experience, relish that challenge. And want to be able to engage and communicate that CEOs are there not just to create and return value for shareholders, but actually they're there to create a better world and a better environment from within which that organisation sits. I think it's a good question. You know, what should they be doing to support? In reality, they probably don't see that they have a role to develop the CCO. I think the onus ultimately, you know, in terms of being proactive about one's own professional development and the development of business acumen and financial acumen, which is absolutely what's demanded, I think, from this role. So I think supportive, yes, because I think it's obviously in the CEO's interest to create a role of trust someone that they can take advice from and create a really unique bond and chemistry with in these times of very troubling, difficult, complex times. So I think the CEO has to be open to developing that kind of relationship, but ultimately I do feel the onus ultimately is on the CCO to create and develop the necessary skills to be able to build that trust and credibility, which is absolutely, as I say, required by the CEO. My call to CCOs is don't lose heart, take heart, because the opportunity is bright. There's never been a greater opportunity, so you have to be courageous in your approach. And you have to stand for what you believe in, and you have to be able to communicate what you actually need in order to do this job effectively. As we've said, there's a constant demand for more, for less, if you like, more communications, more content, for less money, smaller budgets, etc. And you have to be able to challenge that, and you have to be able to communicate that in a language, in a business language that the rest of the board can understand.